Class, picture the scene. It is July 11th, 1782, and the British are finally leaving Savannah, Georgia. After years of occupation, the Redcoats pull out, and American forces move back in. That date matters because it was not just a local Georgia moment, it was a signal flare telling everyone that the British grip on the South was loosening. The National Park Service places the British evacuation of Savannah on July 11, 1782, and the New Georgia Encyclopedia adds that Lieutenant Colonel James Jackson led American troops into the city, while Georgia's government began reassembling in Savannah almost immediately afterward. In classroom terms, this is the moment when the war starts to feel less like a desperate struggle for survival and more like the British quietly realizing, yeah, this is not going the way we planned. Now, do not make the mistake of thinking Savannah's liberation meant the war had suddenly switched off like somebody hit a giant colonial light switch. That is not how history works, and definitely not how war works. Even after Savannah was restored to American control, fighting and maneuvering continued. The British still held other places, especially Charleston and New York City, so the revolution was entering a strange in-between stage. The Patriots could smell victory, but the final paperwork, withdrawals, and political settling had not yet happened. In other words, America in the second half of 1782 was like a class that had technically finished the exam, but was still waiting for the teacher to say, "Pens down, hand in your papers." Then, less than a month later, on August 7, 1782, George Washington did something that students often overlook because it did not involve a battlefield explosion or a dramatic surrender. He created the Badge of Military Merit at Newburgh. Today, that badge is recognized as the ancestor of the Purple Heart. Why is that such a big deal? Because Washington was making a statement about the kind of country this was supposed to become. In the old European model, glory usually flowed upward to aristocrats and senior officers. Washington deliberately honored ordinary soldiers and non-commissioned officers for bravery, fidelity, and service. That was revolutionary in more ways than one. The U.S. Army and Mount Vernon both note that Washington established the award on August 7, 1782, and Mount Vernon emphasizes the democratic spirit behind it. Honor was not meant to belong only to elites. That is one of those quiet nation-building moments where the future United States starts defining its values, while the war is still technically underway. On August 27, 1782, John Laurens was killed in a skirmish along the Combahee River in South Carolina. Laurens is one of those figures who makes historians pause because he carried so much promise close to Washington, deeply committed to the Patriot cause, and unusually outspoken for his time in arguing that enslaved black men should be armed and emancipated in exchange for military service. The National Park Service records that Laurens was killed on that date, while attacking a superior British force near the Combahee, and another NPS page explains that the British, warned in advance, prepared an ambush that cut him down. So even in the closing stretch of the revolution, America was still losing major figures. Victory was coming, yes, but it was arriving with one last grim reminder that wars do not become gentle just because the ending is near. As the summer turned into autumn, the story shifted from muskets and marches to diplomacy and legitimacy. On October 8, 1782, the United States and the Netherlands signed a treaty of amity and commerce at The Hague. That may sound dry, but it was huge. A treaty like that was a receipt, a certificate, a giant international stamp saying the United States was not just a rebellion with good publicity, it was becoming a recognized nation able to make formal agreements. The U.S. Department of State's Office of the Historian identifies October 8, 1782 as the date of this treaty. Put simply, for the class, while soldiers had to win independence on the ground, diplomats had to win independence on paper, and paper mattered because nations deal with nations, not with rumors. On November 4, 1782, Elias Boudinot became president of the Confederation Congress. No, that was not the same as being president of the United States under the later Constitution, and yes, that distinction absolutely matters. Still, Boudinot's election symbolizes the fact that the Americans were not only fighting a war, they were trying to run a government at the same time. The House of Representatives' official history of the Continental and Confederation Congresses lists Boudinot's term as beginning on November 4th 1782. This is one of those moments where you can almost see the skeleton of the new republic under construction, still fragile, still awkward, still underfunded but functioning. America was trying to prove that it could do more than resist Britain, it could govern itself. And then we reach one of the biggest turning points of the entire year, November 30th, 1782, when the United States and Britain signed the preliminary Articles of Peace in Paris. This did not yet finalize everything, but it effectively laid down the basic terms that would become the Treaty of Paris. The Office of the Historian explains that these preliminary articles included British acceptance of American independence and boundaries, along with provisions on debts, loyalist property, and evacuation of British forces. This is a massive moment because it means that by late 1782, the conflict had shifted decisively from can the United States survive to what exactly will the United States look like. Once you get to that stage in a war, the ending is no longer theoretical, it is administrative, it is diplomatic, it is real. On December 14, 1782, they evacuated Charleston, South Carolina. The National Park Service and U.S. Army Historical Materials both identified Charleston's evacuation in mid-December 1782, and Army Historical Material notes that Anthony Wayne's men were among the first American troops to reclaim the city. This mattered because Charleston had been one of Britain's most important southern strongholds. If Savannah's evacuation cracked the illusion of British southern control, Charleston's evacuation shattered it. In a classroom metaphor, once Charleston goes, the British Southern strategy is not struggling. It is over, done, finished. Put it in the archive and stamp it, failed experiment. Even after Charleston was evacuated and the preliminary peace was signed, New York City remained under British occupation into 1783. The Office of the Historian notes that the preliminary peace articles provided for British evacuation of forces from the 13 states, but that process was not instant. So by the end of 1782, America was in a fascinating historical posture, militarily ascendant, diplomatically validated, politically improvising, and still waiting for the very last British exits. That is why historians often describe 1782 not simply as a year of war, but as a year of transition from war to nationhood. The revolution had not merely produced battlefield victories, it was now producing institutions, symbols, treaties, and a new international identity. So, if I were standing in front of class and wanted you to remember the second half of 1782 in one sweep, I would say this: after July 11, 1782, American history becomes a story of momentum hardening into reality. Savannah shows the British retreat is real. Washington's badge of military merit shows the new nation is already shaping its values. Lawrence's death reminds us the cost is still real. The Dutch treaty shows foreign recognition is growing. Boudinot's election shows self-government is continuing. The preliminary peace articles show independence is now being written into diplomacy. Charleston's evacuation shows British control in the South is collapsing. By the time the year closes, the United States is still unfinished, still anxious, still economically shaky, still waiting on final peace, but no longer merely aspiring to independence. It is living in the first awkward, powerful, uncertain months of becoming a country.